Alarms tear through the corridor before I even open my eyes. Red light floods my quarters, pulsing in rhythm with a sound I have never heard on this ship before, a sound reserved only for the worst kind of morning. I am Vex Shan Kalari, an intelligence officer of the Keldari fleet, and the moment my feet hit the cold floor, I already know something has gone wrong at the edge of our territory. I reach the command deck, still fastening the collar of my uniform. Captain Oren Thale stands at the center console, his 4 eyes fixed on a view screen that shows nothing but static interference. Around him, officers shout coordinates and shield percentages, their voices climbing over one another until the noise becomes a wall of panic. I ask what happened. Nobody answers me directly. Instead, someone finally clears the static, and the screen resolves into a live feed from our forward scout post near the edge of neutral space. What I see makes my breathing stop for a moment. Wreckage. Fields of it, drifting silently, glinting under the light of a distant star. Keldari hulls, torn open like paper, tumbling end over end through the void. Captain Thale turns to me, his voice low. He tells me that 3 of our border patrol vessels intercepted an unidentified craft 2 hours ago. The craft was slow, unarmed by every scan they took, broadcasting nothing but a simple greeting on an open frequency. Our patrol commander, a young officer named Doran Vess, decided the vessel was a threat, regardless of what the sensors showed. He gave the order to fire. I feel a cold weight settle in my chest as the captain continues. The unarmed craft did not explode. It did not scatter into pieces the way our patrol expected. Instead, its outer hull flared with strange light, and a heartbeat later, all 3 of our ships lost power entirely. Then, one by one, they were torn apart by something the recordings cannot even clearly identify. No explosion, no warning shot, just quiet, precise destruction, delivered in under a single minute. I ask who built that ship. The bridge falls silent, because nobody has an answer yet. I volunteer to lead the recovery team myself, and the captain agrees, though I can see the reluctance in the tightening of his jaw. We depart within the hour, our shuttle sliding carefully between the drifting wreckage, searching for anything that might tell us who did this and why. The debris field stretches farther than I expected. I direct my team to the largest fragment, a chunk of hull nearly intact, its surface scorched but not melted, cut cleanly instead of blasted apart. That precision unsettles me more than any explosion could. Whoever did this did not simply destroy our ships. They dismantled them with surgical control. Inside the wreckage, my sensors pick up a faint signal, weak but steady, coming from something buried beneath a collapsed support beam. I order my team to clear the debris carefully, and beneath it we find a small, undamaged data core, still humming with power despite everything around it. It did not come from our ships, it came from theirs. I take the core back to my private lab aboard our vessel, sealing the door before anyone else can interfere. My hands tremble slightly as I connect it to our translation systems, uncertain what I am about to uncover. The moment the first files decode, I understand why this species has remained almost invisible to the wider galaxy until now. They were never hiding out of weakness. They were hiding because nobody had given them a reason to be found. The species calls itself human, and their home system is small, tucked away in a spiral arm most of the galactic community considers unremarkable. But the records inside this core are not simple survey logs. They are historical files, thousands of them, spanning centuries of conflict, endurance, and adaptation that no other species I know has matched. I read accounts of wars fought not with energy weapons but with primitive machines, of diseases that swept across their world and were defeated through sheer stubborn persistence, of a species that clawed its way from stone tools to starflight in a fraction of the time it took most galactic civilizations to leave their home planet. One file stops me completely. It is a simple military doctrine document, written in plain language, clearly meant for young officers still learning their trade. It states, without embellishment, that any threat to human lives will be met with a response that does not stop until the threat can never return. Not punishment, not retaliation, simply the permanent removal of danger, delivered with patience and without anger. I sit back in my chair, staring at the words on the screen, and for the first time in my long career, I feel something close to true fear. Not fear of a weapon or a fleet, but fear of an idea, a species that does not fight to win territory or glory, but fights only to make certain A threat never rises again. I bring my findings to Captain Thale immediately, laying out everything the data core revealed. He listens carefully, his expression darkening with each passing detail. But when I finish, he tells me this must go before the Galactic Council without delay. I agree, though something in my gut warns me the Council will not want to hear what I have to say. 3 days later, I stand in the Grand Chamber of the Council, surrounded by representatives from a dozen different species, their voices echoing off high stone walls built to intimidate. I present the wreckage analysis first, then the data core findings, laying out the pattern as clearly as I can. I tell them this species, calling themselves humans, responded to an unprovoked attack with calculated, complete destruction, and that their own doctrine suggests this was restraint, not the full extent of their capability. A representative from the Thren Ascendancy laughs before I even finish speaking. He calls my report exaggerated, insists that any species without proper psionic technology could not possibly pose a serious threat to established galactic powers. Murmurs of agreement ripple through the chamber, and I feel my carefully built case crumbling under the weight of their arrogance. I press forward anyway. I explain that our patrol fired first, that the human vessel offered no resistance until it was directly threatened, and that their retaliation was not born from aggression, but from a defensive doctrine built into the very core of their military thinking. I warn them plainly that provoking this species further, especially without understanding their capabilities, could bring consequences none of us are prepared to face. The council chairperson, an elder of the Vashti Concord, asks if I have any proof of a larger human fleet, any evidence that this was not simply a single well-armed scout ship. I admit I do not yet, and that admission is all the excuse the chamber needs to dismiss my concerns entirely. They vote, almost unanimously, to take no formal action, treating the incident as an isolated skirmish unworthy of council intervention. I leave the chamber that day carrying a heaviness I cannot shake. I know what I saw in that data core. I know the calm, methodical language of that doctrine was not the writing of a weak or desperate people. It was the writing of a species that has already decided how it will respond to violence long before violence ever finds them. Back aboard my ship, I begin compiling everything I have gathered into a private archive, determined to keep watching, even if the council refuses to listen. I request access to any further reports involving human contact, no matter how minor, and my request is granted almost dismissively, as if humoring an officer who has clearly let his imagination run away from him. Weeks pass in relative quiet. I begin to wonder if perhaps the council was right, if this was truly an isolated incident that human forces chose not to escalate. Then a report arrives from a listening post near neutral space, describing an official human delegation requesting formal contact with the Galactic Council for the first time. I read every word of the transmission twice. The tone is measured, polite, almost painfully diplomatic. They ask only for recognized trade rights and safe passage through neutral corridors, offering resource-sharing agreements in return. There is no mention of the border incident, no demand for apology or compensation, nothing that suggests anger or grievance. It is, on its surface, the request of a species eager to join the wider galactic community peacefully. I forward the transmission to Captain Thale with a note attached, reminding him what I found in that data core. He reads it in silence, then looks at me and asks the question that has been sitting in my mind since that day in the council chamber. He asks what happens if someone tests them again, more seriously this time, before the council has any real understanding of what they are dealing with. I do not have an answer for him. All I can offer is what the data told me, that humans do not forget, and that patience is not the same as forgiveness. We both know, without saying it aloud, that somewhere out among the ambitious and arrogant powers of this galaxy, someone is already looking at the human home system and calculating the risk of taking it for themselves. I spend the following days reviewing star charts of the region surrounding human territory, trying to understand who might see this small, quiet civilization and mistake their politeness for weakness. My attention keeps returning to the Zorath Dominion, a power known throughout the galaxy for aggressive expansion, for treating diplomacy as a formality, to be endured only until conquest becomes convenient. I request a private meeting with Captain Thale to share this concern, and he agrees to hear me out fully this time, without the noise of a crowded council chamber pressing against every word. I explain that the Zorath have a long history of testing new species through calculated provocation, striking quickly before anyone can properly assess their strength, then retreating behind claims of misunderstanding if the response proves too costly. The captain asks if I believe the Zorath will target human space directly. I tell him I believe it is only a matter of time, that the calm human request for peaceful contact will be read by Zorath commanders not as strength restrained, but as an invitation. Every signal that speaks of patience to me will speak of weakness to them, and I fear that misunderstanding may be the spark that ignites something none of us are prepared to witness. Captain Thale sits quietly for a long moment before speaking again. He tells me that even if I am right, there is little either of us can do beyond documenting what unfolds and hoping the council finally listens before it is too late. I nod, though the weight in my chest tells me hope may not be enough this time. That night, alone in my quarters, I return to the data core one final time, searching for anything I might have missed. Buried deep within an archived military training file, I find a short recorded statement from a human officer, delivered in a calm, steady voice during what appears to be a routine briefing. The words remain with me long after I close the file. The officer says that humanity has learned, through centuries of hard lessons, that mercy shown too early only invites further harm, and that true safety comes not from threats or displays of strength, but from making absolutely certain that anyone who chooses violence against them understands exactly what that choice will cost. I do not sleep that night. I lie awake replaying those words over and over, understanding now that the Council's mistake was never underestimating human strength. Their true mistake was assuming that patience and diplomacy from an unfamiliar species meant the same thing patience and diplomacy meant among their own kind. I close my eyes knowing, with a certainty that chills me, that somewhere among the stars, that misunderstanding is about to be tested in the worst possible way. The following morning brings a summons I had not expected. Captain Thale calls me to the bridge before first light, his expression unreadable as he hands me a data slate showing fresh sensor readings from a listening station near Zorath-controlled space. My stomach tightens before I even read the details. The readings show unusual fleet movement, dozens of Zorath warships gathering at a staging point far larger than any routine patrol would require. Their stated destination, according to intercepted communications, is officially listed as a training exercise. I do not believe that for a single moment, and neither does the captain. I ask where this staging point leads, though I already suspect the answer before he speaks it aloud. He confirms what I feared, that the most direct route from that position leads straight toward the outer edges of human-controlled space. My hands tighten around the edge of the console as the full weight of the moment settles over me. I request permission to send an urgent report to the Council immediately, warning them that the Zorath appear to be preparing for a large-scale strike against the very species we discussed only weeks earlier. Captain Thale grants it without hesitation, though the tired look in his eyes tells me he expects the same dismissal I received before. I compose the report with careful precision, attaching every relevant detail, the fleet numbers, the staging coordinates, the suspicious nature of the so-called training exercise, timed so soon after human diplomatic outreach. I send it through every priority channel available to me, marking it as urgent, hoping that this time, faced with concrete evidence instead of speculation, the Council will finally act. Hours pass with no response. I pace the length of my quarters, checking the communication logs repeatedly, refreshing data feeds that show no change in the situation. The Zorath fleet remains gathered at their staging point, engines idling, weapons systems reportedly powered, but not yet armed for combat, according to what little intelligence we can gather from this distance. When the Council finally responds, their message is shorter than I expected, and far less urgent than the situation demands. They acknowledge receipt of my report, thank me for my continued vigilance, and inform me that the matter has been forwarded to a subcommittee for further review at the next scheduled session, 3 weeks from now. I read the message twice, certain I must have misunderstood something, but the words remain exactly the same, no matter how many times I look at them. 3 weeks. An entire fleet gathering at the doorstep of a species we barely understand, and the Council's response is to schedule a meeting nearly a month away, as though this were nothing more than a routine trade dispute. Captain Thale reads the response over my shoulder and lets out a slow breath, the the kind that carries more frustration than words ever could. He tells me quietly that bureaucracy has always moved slower than danger, and that this will not be the first time caution arrives too late to matter. I want to argue with him, to insist there must be something more we can do, but deep down I know he is right. I spend the next several hours drafting an unofficial warning of my own, a personal message intended for any human diplomatic contact point, listed in the data I recovered weeks earlier. I know it oversteps my authority, that sending unsanctioned communication to a species the Council has not yet formally recognized could bring serious consequences upon my career, perhaps even upon Captain Thale for allowing it. Still, I send it anyway, keeping the message simple and direct. I identify myself honestly, explain the fleet movement I have observed, and state clearly that a significant force appears to be positioning itself near their territory under the guise of routine exercises. I do not know if the message will even reach anyone capable of understanding it, let alone acting on it in time. 2 days pass in tense silence. I busy myself with routine duties, unable to focus fully on anything beyond the quiet dread building steadily in my chest. Then, during a late evening shift, a response arrives through the same channel I used to send my warning, and I nearly drop the data slate when I see it appear on my screen. The reply is brief, professional, and carries a tone I did not expect from a species facing potential invasion. It thanks me for the information, confirms they are already aware of unusual activity near their border, and states simply that appropriate precautions have been taken. There is no panic in the message, no desperate plea for assistance, only calm acknowledgement, as though this were an expected inconvenience rather than an existential threat. I show the message to Captain Thale, and he studies it for a long moment before speaking. He asks what kind of species responds to news of an approaching invasion fleet with such measured calm. I do not have an answer for him, but the data core I recovered weeks ago echoes in my mind, reminding me that this species has faced worse dangers than this throughout their own turbulent history, and has learned, time and again, how to endure them. Over the following days, sensor stations across the region begin picking up subtle changes near human space. Communication traffic increases slightly, though nothing indicates panic or mass evacuation. Instead, the patterns suggest quiet, organized preparation, the kind that comes not from fear, but from readiness, built through long practice. I begin to wonder, for the first time since this entire situation began, whether the Zorath Dominion truly understands what they are about to provoke. Every piece of evidence I have gathered points toward a species that does not simply react to danger, but has spent generations preparing for exactly this moment, refining both their technology and their resolve, long before any galactic power ever noticed them drifting quietly at the edge of known space. Captain Thale orders our ship to maintain a careful distance from the unfolding situation, monitoring quietly, rather than risking direct involvement that could draw unwanted attention from either side. I agree with the caution, though every instinct within me wants to witness firsthand whatever is about to happen, driven by a mixture of fear and undeniable curiosity that I cannot fully explain even to myself. As the days stretch onward, the Zorath fleet remains gathered at their staging point, seemingly waiting for something, though intelligence reports cannot determine exactly what that trigger might be. I begin to suspect they are searching for the perfect justification, some incident or provocation they can point to later, allowing them to claim their attack was purely defensive, rather than the calculated invasion it truly represents. I do not have to wait long to find out. 3 days later, a garbled emergency transmission reaches our listening station, cutting through standard channels with an urgency that immediately silences every conversation on the bridge. The Zorath have crossed the border. The invasion of human space has begun, and everything I feared, everything the Council refused to take seriously, is no longer a possibility sitting quietly on the horizon. It is happening now, and none of us know exactly what we are about to witness unfold among the stars. The bridge around me erupts into controlled chaos as more fragments of the transmission filter through, each piece more alarming than the last. I grip the edge of my console, watching as Captain Thale orders our sensors realign toward the border, desperate for a clearer picture of what is actually happening beyond the wall of static and panic filling our channels. Within minutes, a stronger signal breaks through, carrying visual data captured by a Keldari relay satellite positioned near the edge of human territory. The image that resolves on our main screen stops every conversation on the bridge instantly. Dozens of Zorath warships, arranged in tight formation, moving steadily through what should be empty space toward the outer defense perimeter of the human home system. I watch the formation carefully, noting the confidence in their approach, the complete absence of caution in how openly they advance. They do not expect meaningful resistance. Every maneuver, every spacing between vessels, speaks of a fleet commander who views this as a formality, rather than a genuine battle, an execution, rather than a war. Captain Thale orders our long-range sensors to track the human response, though initial scans show almost nothing, no gathering fleet, no visible military buildup near the approaching Zorath ships. For a moment, dread creeps through my chest, as I wonder if perhaps the calm human response I witnessed earlier was not confidence at all, but simple resignation to an unstoppable threat. Then the first Zorath ships cross into what our charts mark as the outer edge of the human defense zone, and everything changes in an instant. Points of light flare briefly across our screen, appearing seemingly from nothing, from empty space that showed no readable energy signatures only moments before. I lean forward, trying to make sense of what I am seeing as 3 Zorath vessels simply cease to exist, their hulls consumed by precise, controlled bursts of energy that leave almost nothing behind. A young officer beside me gasps audibly, and I understand exactly why. There was no warning shot, no demand for surrender, no hesitation whatsoever. Whatever defense system just activated did not wait to determine intent. It reacted the instant a threshold was crossed, delivering judgment with a speed that suggests calculation prepared long before this moment ever arrived. I order our sensors to isolate the source of those strikes, and what we find sends a chill through my entire body. There are no visible warships firing those shots. Instead, our scans detect a network of small, heavily disguised platforms scattered throughout the outer system, blending seamlessly with asteroid fields and debris that any casual observer would have dismissed as natural clutter. Captain Thale asks how long such a defense network could have existed undetected, and I can only offer speculation, though everything points toward years, perhaps decades of careful, patient construction. This was never a hasty response to the Zorath threat. This was infrastructure built long before any Zorath commander ever considered testing human resolve, prepared quietly and left waiting, exactly like the doctrine I found within that recovered data core. The Zorath fleet, clearly caught off guard by the sudden losses, breaks formation in visible confusion. Ships scatter in different directions, some attempting to retreat toward the border they just crossed, others pressing forward with what appears to be desperate aggression, firing wildly at targets their sensors struggle to properly identify among the disguised platforms. I watch as another wave of precise strikes eliminates 4 more vessels in rapid succession, the defense network adjusting instantly to the scattered formation, tracking and eliminating targets with a consistency that suggests intelligent coordination, rather than simple automated response patterns. This is not a static minefield reacting blindly. Something, or someone, is actively directing this defense with careful, deliberate control. A junior officer reports increased communication traffic from deeper within the human system, though our translation systems struggle to keep pace with the volume and speed of the exchanges. What little we can decode suggests calm, methodical coordination rather than panic, voices calling out target designations and confirming successful intercepts, with the same steady tone one might use during a routine training exercise. Captain Thale turns to me, his 4 eyes wide with something between disbelief and dawning realization. He asks quietly whether this is truly their full defensive capability, or merely the first layer of something far larger waiting deeper within their territory. I do not answer immediately, my mind racing back to the doctrine I read weeks ago, the calm certainty embedded in every human military document I managed to translate. I tell him honestly that I believe this is only the beginning, that a species capable of building such a sophisticated hidden defense network around their outer system almost certainly possesses additional layers of protection closer to their core worlds. The Zorath commanders, confident in their overwhelming numbers, may have just discovered they underestimated their target far more severely than they ever imagined possible. The remaining Zorath ships, now reduced by nearly a third of their original numbers, attempt a coordinated retreat, pulling back toward the border, in a formation far less confident than the one they arrived with. I watch closely, expecting the human defenses to continue their assault, to press the advantage and eliminate the fleeing fleet entirely, while the opportunity remains. Instead, the strikes stop abruptly the moment the retreating ships cross back over the border into neutral space. No pursuit, no further engagement. The defense platforms simply power down their weapons and return to their disguised, dormant state, as though the entire encounter had been nothing more than a routine deterrent exercise, rather than the desperate defense of a sovereign system against invasion. I find this restraint more unsettling than the attack itself. Any reasonable military commander, having just repelled a hostile force with such overwhelming efficiency, might be expected to press forward, to eliminate the threat entirely while it remains vulnerable. Instead, humanity chose precision and restraint, defending their territory exactly as much as necessary, and not a single measure more. Captain Thale orders a full report compiled immediately, and I begin the tedious work of cataloging everything we witnessed, cross-referencing sensor data with the doctrine information I recovered weeks earlier. The pattern becomes increasingly clear the deeper I dig. This was never a desperate improvised defense. This was a carefully rehearsed response, executed with the calm precision of a plan practiced many times before this day ever arrived. Word of the battle spreads quickly through galactic communication networks, and within hours, the story reaches every corner of known space, distorted and reshaped by each retelling. Some reports claim the humans possess advanced psionic technology hidden from galactic scans. Others insist the entire battle was a Zorath tactical retreat rather than a genuine defeat, an attempt to save face rather than admit the humiliation of losing so decisively to a supposedly primitive species. I return to the council chamber once again, this time carrying full sensor recordings rather than mere speculation, hoping the undeniable evidence will finally break through the wall of dismissal I encountered before. The chamber feels different this time, quieter, the usual confident murmuring, replaced by something closer to uncertain tension, as representatives wait to hear what actually happened at the edge of human space. I present the recordings without embellishment, letting the footage speak for itself as I narrate the sequence of events exactly as they unfolded. I watch faces shift throughout the chamber, as they witness the disguised defense platforms activating, the precise strikes eliminating Zorath vessels one after another, the calm restraint shown once the threat retreated back across the border. The Zorath ambassador, a tall, imposing figure named Krath Dolvane, rises immediately to challenge my presentation, insisting the footage has been manipulated, that no reasonable species could possess such advanced hidden defenses without prior galactic knowledge of their existence. His voice carries the same arrogant confidence I remember from our earlier meeting, though I notice a slight tremor beneath his words that betrays genuine unease. I offer to allow independent verification of the recordings by any neutral party the Council selects, confident the data will withstand scrutiny, since it came directly from our own long-range sensors, rather than any human source that might be accused of exaggeration or deception. The chairperson agrees to this verification, though the tension in the chamber only continues building as representatives whisper among themselves. During a brief recess, I find myself approached by a representative I have never spoken with directly before, a quiet, thoughtful being from the Vashti Concord named Celis Morin. She asks if I truly believe humanity possesses additional layers of defense beyond what we witnessed, and I answer honestly that everything in their historical patterns suggests exactly that, a species that prepares thoroughly and reveals only as much strength as necessary for any given situation. Celis considers my answer carefully before sharing something that catches me completely off guard. She tells me the Vashti Concord has been quietly attempting diplomatic contact with humanity for several weeks now, separate from the Council's official channels, hoping to establish trade relationships before other powers recognize the potential value of human technology and innovation. I ask her what response they have received so far, and she admits the human diplomats have been polite, but notably cautious, willing to discuss trade in general terms, but unwilling to share any details regarding their military capabilities or defensive technology. This caution, she suggests, might explain why the wider galaxy remains so poorly informed about what humanity is truly capable of accomplishing. When the Council reconvenes, the verification process confirms everything within my original report. silencing much of the doubt that Ambassador Dulvane attempted to sow earlier. The chairperson calls for formal discussion regarding how the council should proceed, given this confirmed demonstration of significant, previously unknown human defensive capability. The debate that follows stretches for hours, factions forming and dissolving as different species argue over the appropriate response. Some, like Celis and the Vashti Concord, advocate for cautious, respectful diplomatic engagement, recognizing humanity as a power worth understanding, rather than underestimating further. Others, particularly those aligned with Zorath interests, continue insisting this was merely a fortunate defensive stroke that should not be mistaken for genuine military superiority. I watch this argument unfold with a growing sense of frustration, understanding that even overwhelming evidence cannot fully overcome pride and ambition among certain galactic powers. The Thren Ascendancy representative, silent throughout most of the discussion, finally speaks near the end of the session, his tone carrying a dismissive confidence that immediately sets my nerves on edge once again. He argues that a defensive victory against an overextended, poorly coordinated Zorath assault proves nothing about how humanity would fare against a properly organized, overwhelming force. He suggests the true measure of their capability remains untested, and that any species claiming otherwise is simply falling victim to exaggerated fear rather than sound strategic analysis. I request permission to speak once more, and though clearly reluctant, the chairperson grants it. I remind the chamber of the doctrine I discovered weeks earlier, reading aloud the exact words describing humanity's approach to threats against their people. I emphasize that this defense we witnessed was not their full response, merely their measured reaction to an invasion that crossed only their outer border, executed with visible restraint rather than full retaliation. I ask the chamber directly what might happen if a power chose to test humanity more seriously, pushing deeper into their territory, or directly threatening their core worlds rather than a distant outer perimeter. My question hangs in the air unanswered, met with uncomfortable silence rather than the confident dismissal I received during my first appearance before this council. The session ends without formal resolution, the council once again choosing to delay any decisive action, though this time, the vote to schedule further discussion passes with noticeably less enthusiasm than before. I leave the chamber understanding that fear has finally begun creeping into the minds of at least some council members, even if pride continues preventing others from acknowledging the danger clearly building around us. Returning to my ship, I find a message waiting from Captain Thale, requesting my immediate presence on the bridge. I arrive to find him reviewing new sensor data, his expression grim as he gestures for me to examine the readings myself. Zorath fleet movements continue near the border, though this time the numbers gathering far exceed anything we witnessed during the initial failed invasion. I ask if this could simply be defensive positioning following their recent defeat, though I already suspect the answer before Captain Thale responds. He shakes his head slowly, explaining that intercepted communications suggest something far more troubling, discussions among Zorath commanders regarding a second assault, one intended to overwhelm the outer defenses entirely through sheer numbers, rather than the smaller, more cautious force they sent initially. I feel the weight of everything I have witnessed and warned against, settling heavily upon me once again. The Zorath, humiliated by their unexpected defeat, appear determined to prove their dominance through overwhelming force, rather than accepting the lesson their first encounter should have taught them clearly. I fear this decision will not bring them the victory they seek, but rather confirm every warning I have tried desperately to communicate since the very beginning of this unfolding crisis. Captain Thale asks what I believe humanity's response will be if the Zorath commit fully to a larger, more determined assault. I consider the question carefully, drawing upon everything I have learned about this species through their history, their doctrine, and now their demonstrated defensive capability. I tell him honestly that I no longer believe humanity will show the same measured restraint they displayed during this first encounter. Something in their doctrine, in the calm certainty of every document I translated, suggests a species that responds proportionally to genuine threat. A second invasion, larger and more determined than the first, will likely receive a response calibrated to match that increased danger, rather than the restrained defensive action we witnessed only hours ago. I fear, more than anything, that the Zorath Dominion is about to discover exactly how far humanity is willing to go when their patience finally reaches its limit. I spend that evening alone in my quarters, reviewing the recorded footage from the first engagement over and over, searching for any detail that might help me better understand what kind of response the Zorath should genuinely expect if they choose to escalate further. I noticed something I missed during my initial review. A brief moment where one of the disguised defense platforms adjusts its firing pattern mid-engagement, compensating for a maneuver the targeted vessel had not yet even completed. This detail unsettles me considerably once I fully process its implications. The system was not simply reacting to current positions. It was anticipating future movement with a level of predictive accuracy that suggests either extraordinary computational capability or an operator with remarkable tactical intuition guiding the response in real time. Either possibility carries troubling implications regarding the true depth of technology humanity has managed to develop, while remaining largely unnoticed by the wider galactic community. I bring this observation to Captain Thale the following morning, and he studies the footage carefully alongside me, his expression growing increasingly troubled as he recognizes the same pattern I identified the night before. He asks whether I believe this predictive targeting represents some form of artificial intelligence operating independently, or whether skilled human operators are simply demonstrating exceptional tactical awareness during real-time combat situations. I admit I cannot say with certainty, though I lean toward believing the truth likely involves some combination of both possibilities: sophisticated systems designed to assist human decision-making rather than replace it entirely. This distinction matters considerably, I explain, because a species that maintains direct human oversight over such powerful defensive systems demonstrates a level of caution and responsibility that a fully autonomous system might not necessarily guarantee. Captain Thale considers this perspective thoughtfully before sharing his own concern, wondering aloud whether other galactic powers observing this same footage might draw entirely different conclusions, focusing purely on the raw capability demonstrated, rather than the measured, responsible manner in which humanity appears to be deploying it. I acknowledge this concern readily, understanding that fear often distorts rational analysis, particularly among civilizations already predisposed toward viewing unfamiliar capability as inherently threatening regardless of context or demonstrated restraint. Over the following days, I continue monitoring communication channels throughout the region, tracking how various galactic powers are processing news of this unprecedented engagement. Reports vary considerably depending on the source, some offering relatively balanced assessments, acknowledging both the impressive defensive capability and the notable restraint humanity demonstrated once the immediate threat had been neutralized. Others, however, focus almost exclusively on the destructive potential demonstrated, stoking fear rather than encouraging measured, rational understanding of what actually transpired during the engagement. I find myself growing increasingly concerned about this second category of reporting, recognizing that fear-driven narratives often prove far more persuasive than careful, nuanced analysis, particularly among populations and leadership already inclined toward suspicion of unfamiliar civilizations. I worry that these distorted narratives may ultimately do more damage to peaceful relations between humanity and the wider galaxy than the actual events themselves ever could. Captain Thale suggests we compile a comprehensive factual report combining sensor data, communication intercepts, and careful analysis, hoping to counter some of the more sensationalized narratives currently circulating throughout galactic communication networks. I agree this represents a worthwhile effort, though I harbor genuine doubt regarding how effectively measured, factual reporting can compete against the more emotionally compelling, if less accurate, narratives already spreading rapidly across various channels. We spend the following 2 days compiling this comprehensive report, cross-referencing every piece of available evidence to ensure accuracy and objectivity throughout our analysis. I include detailed explanation regarding the defensive nature of the engagement, the clear restraint shown once the immediate threat retreated, and careful contextualization regarding the unprovoked nature of the original Zorath incursion that triggered this entire sequence of events. Once complete, we submit this report through official council channels, hoping it might serve as a valuable resource for representatives struggling to separate legitimate concern from exaggerated fear-mongering currently dominating much of the surrounding discourse. Whether this effort ultimately proves successful remains to be seen, though I take some small comfort in knowing we have at least provided an accurate, thorough account for anyone genuinely interested in understanding what actually transpired during those tense hours near the human border. 3 days pass in tense anticipation before the Zorath finally commit to their second assault. And this time, there is no attempt at subtlety, no pretense of a training exercise meant to disguise their true intentions. Hundreds of warships surge across the border simultaneously, spreading across multiple approach vectors in an obvious attempt to overwhelm whatever defense network humanity managed to hide throughout their outer system. I watched the sensor feeds alongside Captain Thale, both of us leaning forward as the massive formation crosses into contested space. The scale of this assault dwarfs the first attempt entirely. Enough firepower gathered in a single fleet to threaten several mid-sized systems simultaneously, let alone the defenses of a single, still relatively unknown civilization. The human defense platforms activate again almost immediately, disguised installations revealing themselves across the outer system in coordinated bursts of precise, targeted fire. I watch as dozens of Zorath vessels fall within the opening minutes, their formation disrupted by losses far exceeding anything they suffered during the first encounter, yet the sheer number of remaining ships continues pressing forward regardless. This time, something different happens. As the Zorath fleet pushes deeper past the outer perimeter, new signatures begin appearing on our sensors, larger vessels emerging from positions previously undetected, moving with purposeful coordination, rather than the static defense pattern we witnessed before. I realize, with a growing sense of dread, that we are witnessing the human military fleet itself, finally revealing its presence after remaining hidden throughout the entire opening skirmish. Captain Thale asks how such substantial vessels remained completely undetected by our long-range scans until this very moment, and I can only offer theories, speculation regarding advanced cloaking technology, or perhaps simple strategic positioning that kept them beyond our sensor range until the moment they chose to reveal themselves. Either explanation carries the same unsettling implication, that humanity possesses capabilities far exceeding anything the wider galaxy previously understood. The battle that unfolds moves with a speed and precision that leaves me struggling to process everything happening simultaneously across multiple engagement zones. Human vessels move with coordinated efficiency, striking vulnerable points in the Zorath formation, while remaining protected behind carefully maintained defensive positions, never overextending, never leaving themselves exposed to counterattack, despite their aggressive offensive maneuvers. I notice something particularly striking as the engagement continues: the complete absence of what I would consider reckless or desperate tactics among the human fleet. Every maneuver appears calculated, every strike delivered with clear purpose, as though this entire battle follows a script rehearsed countless times before this exact moment ever arrived. There is no panic in their formation, no hesitation in their response, only calm, methodical execution of a plan, clearly prepared long in advance. The Zorath fleet, despite their overwhelming numerical advantage, begins fragmenting under the relentless pressure, formations breaking apart as commanders struggle to coordinate an effective response against an enemy that seems to anticipate their every move before it even happens. I watch as entire squadrons are systematically isolated and eliminated, cut off from support and destroyed before reinforcements can arrive to assist them. 2 hours into the battle, the Zorath fleet commander finally orders a full retreat, though by this point, nearly half their original force has already been destroyed or disabled beyond any hope of continued combat effectiveness. I watch the remaining ships attempt to flee back toward the border, expecting once again to see the same measured restraint humanity displayed during the first encounter. This time, the human fleet does not stop at the border. I sit frozen as I watch human warships continue their pursuit, crossing into what should be neutral space without hesitation, weapons still active, still targeting the fleeing Zorath vessels with the same calm precision they demonstrated throughout the entire engagement. Captain Thale mutters something under his breath, and I understand exactly what has changed. The first assault warranted restraint. This second, more determined attack has apparently exhausted whatever patience humanity extended during their initial response. The pursuit continues for nearly an hour before the human fleet finally breaks off, allowing the remnants of the Zorath force to escape deeper into their own territory. I expect this to mark the end of the engagement, a decisive but ultimately contained victory, that might finally convince the Zorath Dominion to abandon their aggressive ambitions toward human space entirely. Instead, something else catches my attention as I review the sensor logs more carefully. Small, fast-moving vessels detach from the main human fleet during the pursuit, vessels far smaller than typical warships, moving with a stealth profile that makes them incredibly difficult to track, even with our specialized equipment. I flagged this anomaly immediately, uncertain what purpose such vessels might serve during an otherwise straightforward pursuit operation. Captain Thale asks for my assessment, and I admit I am not entirely certain, though something about their behavior reminds me uncomfortably of reconnaissance patterns. Vessels, designed to gather intelligence rather than engage directly in combat. If humanity is deploying scouts alongside their pursuing fleet, it suggests this engagement may not be ending as cleanly as the retreating Zorath forces might hope. Over the following days, my suspicions prove disturbingly accurate. Reports begin filtering in from various listening posts throughout Zorath-controlled space, describing strange incidents occurring at scattered locations, far from the initial battle site. Supply depots losing contact unexpectedly, communication relays going dark without explanation. Small outposts reporting identified vessels detected briefly before all contact ceases entirely. I compile these scattered reports carefully, searching for a pattern among what initially appears to be random, unconnected incidents. The pattern, once I identify it, sends a chill through my entire body. Every affected location traces back to infrastructure directly supporting the fleet that attacked human space, supply lines, communication networks, training facilities, all systematically compromised or destroyed in a coordinated campaign that extends far beyond the initial battlefield. I bring this analysis immediately to Captain Thale, laying out the connections I have discovered across dozens of separate incidents. He studies the pattern carefully, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning understanding as the true scope of what humanity has initiated becomes increasingly clear. This is not simple retaliation for a single battle. This is a deliberate, methodical campaign designed to systematically dismantle the Zorath Dominion's capacity to ever threaten human space again. I remember the words from that recorded training briefing I found within the recovered data core. The calm certainty describing how humanity ensures that anyone who chooses violence against them understands exactly what that choice will cost. I understand now, watching this campaign unfold with terrifying precision, that those were not merely words meant to sound impressive during a training exercise. They represented an actual operational doctrine, one currently being executed against the Zorath Dominion, with methodical, unhurried patience. Captain Thale asks how long humanity might sustain such a widespread campaign, striking multiple targets across Zorath territory simultaneously, while presumably still maintaining their primary defensive fleet near their own home system. I admit I do not know, though the sheer scope of what we are witnessing suggests resources and capabilities that far exceed what any galactic intelligence assessment previously attributed to this species. Word of the escalating conflict spreads rapidly throughout galactic communication networks, and I notice a distinct shift in tone compared to the aftermath of the first battle, where previous reports carried dismissive skepticism. This new wave of information carries genuine alarm, other species beginning to recognize that whatever is unfolding within Zorath territory represents something far more significant than a simple border skirmish that resolved itself quickly. I request another audience before the Galactic Council, hoping this new evidence, combined with everything I presented previously, might finally convince them to take meaningful action before this situation escalates further. The chairperson grants my request with noticeably less reluctance than before, and I sense a growing recognition throughout the council that ignoring this crisis is no longer a viable option regardless of pride or political considerations. Standing before the assembled representatives once again, I present my analysis of the coordinated strikes occurring throughout Zorath territory, connecting each incident carefully to demonstrate the deliberate, systematic nature of this ongoing campaign. I watch faces throughout the chamber shift from concern to genuine alarm, as the full scope of what humanity has initiated becomes clear to everyone present. Ambassador Dulvane rises to address the chamber, though his usual confident arrogance has clearly diminished considerably since our last meeting. He requests, rather than demands, that the Council consider intervening on behalf of the Zorath Dominion, framing humanity's response as disproportionate retaliation that threatens to destabilize the broader galactic community, rather than remaining contained to a single isolated conflict. I feel a surge of frustration at this request, understanding immediately that the Zorath, having initiated this entire crisis through unprovoked aggression, now seek council protection from the consequences of their own reckless decisions. I remind the Chamber clearly that humanity did not initiate this conflict, that every action they have taken represents response rather than aggression, defense rather than conquest. Celis Morin rises to speak next, her calm, measured voice cutting through the growing tension within the chamber. She reminds everyone present that the Council had every opportunity to intervene diplomatically before this situation escalated to its current state, opportunities that were repeatedly dismissed or delayed, despite clear warnings presented weeks earlier. She suggests that whatever consequences the Zorath Dominion now faces stem directly from choices they made independently, without any provocation from humanity whatsoever. The debate that follows grows increasingly heated, factions solidifying around different interpretations of what appropriate council action should look like moving forward. Some representatives advocate for immediate diplomatic intervention, attempting to broker a ceasefire before the conflict expands further. Others, recognizing the clear pattern of Zorath aggression followed by proportional human response, argue that council intervention would represent an unjust protection of the aggressor, rather than genuine peacekeeping. I watch this debate unfold with a strange mixture of vindication and growing unease. Vindication, because the Council finally recognizes the seriousness of what I warned them about weeks earlier. Unease, because I understand this recognition has arrived too late to prevent the very consequences I tried desperately to help them avoid in the first place. The session eventually concludes with the Council authorizing a formal diplomatic delegation to attempt contact with human leadership, hoping to better understand their objectives and perhaps negotiate some form of resolution before the conflict expands beyond Zorath territory entirely. I am selected to accompany this delegation, given my extensive research into human doctrine and behavior throughout this unfolding crisis. Preparing for this journey, I review everything I have gathered once more, searching for any insight that might help navigate the delicate negotiations ahead. I think back to the calm, measured response humanity offered when I sent my personal warning weeks earlier, the complete absence of panic, despite facing what should have been an overwhelming threat to their entire civilization. I begin to understand, more clearly than ever before, that humanity's greatest strength may not lie solely in their military capability, impressive as it clearly is, but in their unwavering patience and calculated restraint. They did not panic when threatened. They did not overreact during their initial defense. They responded proportionally, escalating only when the threat itself escalated, following a doctrine built through generations of hard-learned experience, rather than impulsive emotion. As our delegation vessel prepares for departure toward human space, I find myself wondering what we might discover upon finally meeting these people directly, rather than studying them from a distance through intercepted data and second-hand reports. Everything I have learned so far suggests a species far more complex, far more capable, and far more dangerous than anyone in this galaxy initially believed possible when their first quiet, unassuming vessel drifted peacefully into contested space all those weeks ago. The journey toward human space takes several days aboard our modest delegation vessel, time I spend reviewing every scrap of information I have gathered since this crisis first began, hoping to arrive as thoroughly prepared as possible for whatever awaits our small diplomatic party. Captain Thale spends much of this journey in quiet conversation with the other delegation members, gauging their expectations and gently tempering some of the more exaggerated fears that have understandably taken hold among certain council representatives. I find myself reflecting often during these quiet transit hours on the strange path that brought me to this particular moment, from a junior intelligence officer investigating routine border wreckage to a central figure in what may become one of the most significant diplomatic encounters our galaxy has witnessed in generations. The weight of that responsibility settles heavily upon me, though I find a certain calm resolve replacing the anxiety that once dominated my thoughts during those earlier, uncertain days. One of our delegation members, a cautious diplomat named Torin Wexel, approaches me during a quiet meal period to ask whether I genuinely believe humanity intends to honor any agreement we manage to negotiate, or whether he should expect the same pattern of calculated deception he has witnessed from other, less trustworthy civilizations throughout his lengthy diplomatic career. I consider his questions seriously before answering. I explain that everything I have observed throughout this crisis, from their measured defensive response to their calm, unhurried demeanor even when facing potential invasion, suggests a civilization that values consistency and honesty as fundamental principles rather than mere convenient diplomatic tools. Torin listens carefully, though I can see lingering skepticism in his expression, the natural caution of someone who has witnessed too many broken promises throughout a long career, navigating complex galactic politics. I do not fault him for this skepticism, understanding that trust must be earned through demonstrated action, rather than simply granted based on hopeful assumption. I tell him honestly that our upcoming meeting will offer valuable insight into whether humanity's stated intentions align genuinely with their actual behavior, and that we should approach this historic encounter with open minds, rather than predetermined conclusions in either direction. As our vessel finally approaches the outer boundary of confirmed human territory, I notice a subtle shift in the atmosphere among our delegation, nervous energy building, as everyone aboard recognizes we are about to become the first official council representatives to set foot, quite literally, within humanity's sphere of influence. I find my own hands trembling slightly as I review my prepared notes one final time, uncertain whether this reaction stems from genuine anxiety or simple anticipation of finally meeting, face to face, the species that has consumed so much of my attention these past several weeks. Captain Thale calls a brief final briefing before our shuttle begins its approach, reminding every delegate of proper protocol and the importance of representing the Council with dignity and respect, regardless of whatever we might discover during this historic encounter. I listen carefully, though my mind continues drifting toward the countless questions still unanswered, despite everything I have learned through recovered data and second-hand intelligence reports. I wonder what their cities might look like, whether their architecture reflects the same practical efficiency evident in their military vessels, or whether their civilian world carries an entirely different character shaped by different priorities than pure security and defense. I wonder, too, what ordinary conversation with a human might feel like, whether the calm, measured tone I have observed in official communications extends into casual, everyday interaction as well. Torin Wexil catches my eye across the shuttle cabin, offering a small, nervous smile that suggests he shares similar uncertainty despite his considerably longer diplomatic experience. I find some comfort in recognizing that even seasoned professionals approach this moment with genuine apprehension, understanding that no amount of preparation can fully substitute for direct, personal experience of something entirely unprecedented within our collective galactic history. As the outer perimeter security escort falls into formation around our vessel, I take one final moment to steady my thoughts, reminding myself of everything I have learned throughout this journey, the doctrine, the restraint, the calm proportionality that has defined every human action I have witnessed thus far. Whatever awaits us beyond this final approach, I remind myself firmly, we carry with us the accumulated wisdom of careful observation rather than blind speculation, and that preparation must now guide us through whatever remarkable discoveries lie just ahead. Our delegation vessel drops out of transit at the edge of a security perimeter I did not detect until the moment our sensors nearly overloaded from the sheer density of monitoring signals surrounding us. Captain Thale, seated beside me in the small diplomatic shuttle, tightens his grip on the armrest as three sleek human vessels appear seemingly from nowhere, flanking our position with practiced precision. A voice crackles through our communication system, calm and professional, requesting identification and stated purpose for our approach. I respond carefully, identifying our delegation and our intent to establish formal diplomatic contact on behalf of the Galactic Council. There is a brief pause, long enough that I wonder if we have already made some critical mistake, before the voice returns, granting us permission to proceed toward a designated meeting coordinate. As we continue forward under careful escort, I study the human vessels flanking us, noting details my earlier data recovery never fully captured. Their construction feels different from anything else I have encountered throughout the galaxy, practical rather than ornamental. Every visible component clearly serving a defined purpose rather than existing merely for aesthetic impression. There is an efficiency to their design that speaks volumes about the priorities of whoever built them. We arrive eventually at a modest space station orbiting what our sensors identify as a heavily fortified but otherwise unremarkable planet. clearly not their primary homeworld, but rather a designated diplomatic outpost established specifically for interactions with unfamiliar species. The station itself appears smaller than I expected, functional rather than impressive, though something about its quiet efficiency unsettles me more than an elaborate display of wealth or power ever could. We are greeted upon docking by a woman who introduces herself as Diplomat Laura Bennett, her expression carrying professional warmth without the exaggerated friendliness I have encountered from other species, eager to make favorable first impressions. She guides our delegation through clean, functional corridors, toward a meeting room prepared for our discussion, her pace measured and unhurried, despite the significance of this historic first formal contact. Inside the meeting room, I find myself studying every detail carefully, searching for any insight into the culture and mindset of this species we have spent weeks analyzing from a careful distance. The room itself offers little beyond simple, practical furniture and a large viewport overlooking the planet below, though I notice subtle security measures woven throughout the design, unobtrusive but clearly present for anyone paying close enough attention. Diplomat Bennett takes her seat across from our delegation, joined shortly after by a second representative, a man introduced simply as Advisor Daniel Marsh, whose quiet, watchful demeanor suggests military background despite his civilian title. I find myself immediately curious about the relationship between diplomatic and military authority within human governance, wondering how deeply intertwined these two aspects of their society truly are. Captain Thale opens our discussion by formally presenting the Council's desire to establish peaceful diplomatic relations, expressing regret regarding the earlier border incident that initiated this entire unfortunate chain of events. Diplomat Bennett listens carefully, her expression neither warming nor cooling throughout his statement, maintaining the same measured professionalism I noticed from the very first moment of our arrival. When Captain Thale finishes, she responds with careful precision, acknowledging the Council's diplomatic gesture while making clear, without any trace of aggression in her tone, that humanity's response to Zorath aggression remains entirely separate from this new diplomatic relationship being established with the wider Council. I sense immediately that she is drawing a careful distinction, one that speaks volumes about how humanity approaches these complex galactic relationships. I ask, perhaps more directly than diplomatic protocol typically allows, whether the ongoing campaign against Zorath infrastructure will continue, regardless of any agreements reached during our discussions today. Advisor Marsh answers this time, his voice steady and unwavering, as he explains that the current operation will continue until every threat directly connected to the invasion of human space has been thoroughly neutralized, a process he describes with unsettling calm as simply following established protocol. I press further, asking what exactly defines the scope of this operation, curious whether humanity intends to pursue complete destruction of the Zorath Dominion entirely, or whether their objectives remain more narrowly focused. Advisor Marsh explains, with the same measured tone throughout, that humanity has no interest in conquering Zorath territory or eliminating their civilization entirely. Their objective, he states clearly, is simply ensuring the specific military capabilities and command structures responsible for authorizing the invasion can never pose a threat to human space again. This distinction strikes me as important, and I find myself recording every detail carefully, understanding that this explanation offers crucial insight into how humanity approaches conflict more broadly. This is not conquest driven by ambition or greed. This is methodical, targeted elimination of a specific threat, executed with enough precision to avoid unnecessary escalation beyond what the original provocation actually warrants. Diplomat Bennett shifts our conversation toward the trade relationship the Council originally hoped to establish, and for the first time throughout our meeting, I notice genuine warmth entering her voice, as she discusses potential benefits of peaceful cooperation between our civilizations. She explains humanity's interest in fair, mutually beneficial exchange, emphasizing repeatedly that they seek partnership rather than domination in any future relationship with the broader galactic community. I find myself genuinely surprised by the sincerity in her words, having expected perhaps calculated diplomatic language designed purely to advance strategic interests. Instead, her explanation carries the same measured honesty I noticed throughout our entire meeting, a consistency that begins convincing me that humanity's stated intentions likely reflect their genuine approach to galactic relationships rather than mere political posturing. Captain Thale asks directly what humanity hopes other galactic powers might learn from the ongoing conflict with the Zorath Dominion, curious whether this entire situation serves some broader strategic purpose beyond simple defensive necessity. Advisor Marsh considers this question carefully before responding, his answer carrying weight that settles heavily over our entire delegation. He explains that humanity does not seek to teach lessons through violence, nor does their response represent any calculated attempt to establish dominance over other species through fear or intimidation. Rather, their consistent, proportional response to threats simply reflects who they are as a civilization, shaped by centuries of hard-learned experience regarding what genuine security actually requires. Other species, he suggests, are free to interpret that consistency however they choose, though humanity's actions will remain the same regardless of external perception. I find this response particularly illuminating, understanding now that humanity's approach stems not from calculated strategy designed to intimidate the wider galaxy, but from deeply ingrained cultural values developed through their own turbulent history. This realization shifts something within my own understanding, moving away from viewing them purely as a potential threat, toward recognizing them as a civilization operating according to consistent, if unfamiliar, principles. Our discussion continues for several more hours, covering various aspects of potential trade agreements, cultural exchange possibilities, and the establishment of formal diplomatic channels between human authorities and the broader Galactic Council. Throughout this extended conversation, I notice consistent patterns in how both Diplomat Bennett and Advisor Marsh approach each topic. Careful and measured, never overpromising, always emphasizing mutual benefit rather than unilateral advantage. As our meeting draws toward its conclusion, I find myself asking one final question, driven by genuine curiosity rather than official diplomatic necessity. I ask what humanity hopes their relationship with the wider galactic community might eventually become, once current tensions with the Zorath Dominion finally resolve themselves completely. Diplomat Bennett considers this question thoughtfully before answering, her expression softening slightly for the first time throughout our entire discussion. She explains that humanity hopes, eventually, to be recognized not as a threat to be feared or a curiosity to be studied, but simply as one civilization among many, contributing whatever unique value they can offer, while respecting the sovereignty and independence of every other species they encounter throughout their continued exploration of the galaxy. Her answer stays with me long after our delegation departs the station, carrying with us formal agreements establishing initial diplomatic and trade relationships between humanity and several Council-aligned civilizations. I find myself reflecting on everything I witnessed during this historic first contact, understanding now that the fear surrounding humanity throughout much of the galaxy stems largely from misunderstanding, rather than any genuine malicious intent on their part. Yet even as this realization settles within me, I cannot ignore the underlying truth that continues shaping every interaction humanity has with the wider galactic community. They are patient, measured, and genuinely interested in peaceful cooperation, but that patience carries clear limits, boundaries that, once crossed, trigger a response calculated with the same careful precision they bring to every other aspect of their civilization. Captain Thale voices similar thoughts as our shuttle departs human space, expressing cautious optimism regarding this newly established relationship, while acknowledging the very real danger that remains should any future power make the same mistake the Zorath Dominion continues paying for even now. I agree completely, understanding that the delicate balance between peaceful cooperation and devastating consequence remains entirely dependent upon other species choosing wisdom over aggression when interacting with this remarkable, complicated civilization. As we return toward Council space, carrying news of this successful diplomatic breakthrough, I cannot shake the persistent feeling that our meeting, however encouraging, represents merely the opening chapter of a much longer, more complex relationship between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. Something tells me, with unsettling certainty, that not every species will learn from the Zorath Dominion's costly mistake, and that somewhere among the ambitious powers scattered throughout known space, another test of human patience may already be quietly taking shape. During our final hours aboard the station before departure, Diplomat Bennett offers to show our delegation a small viewing gallery overlooking the planet below, a gesture that strikes me as unexpectedly personal, given the formal nature of our discussions until that point. Standing beside her at the viewport, I take the opportunity to ask a question that has lingered in my mind throughout our entire visit, curious about her own personal thoughts regarding the conflict that brought our two civilizations into contact in the first place. She considers my question for a long moment before answering, her gaze remaining fixed on the planet turning slowly beneath us. She tells me that she has read every casualty report from the border skirmish personally, that she does not view the Zorath losses as an abstract statistic, but as genuine consequence that weighs on her, even knowing the attack was unprovoked and the response proportional. This admission surprises me, revealing a depth of reflection I had not expected from someone representing a civilization capable of such overwhelming military precision. I ask whether this weight ever causes hesitation in how humanity approaches such conflicts, and she shakes her head slowly, explaining that hesitation born from guilt would only invite further harm toward people she is sworn to protect. The weight remains, she explains, precisely because it should remain, a constant reminder that every response carries real cost, ensuring that such responses are never taken lightly or escalated beyond what genuine necessity requires. Advisor Marsh joins us at the viewport, adding his own perspective to our conversation. He explains that this same careful weighing of consequence extends throughout every level of human military doctrine, from the individual crew member operating a defense platform to the highest command authority overseeing broader strategic decisions. Nothing, he insists, happens without deliberate consideration of proportionality and necessity. I find myself deeply moved by this exchange, understanding now with far greater clarity why humanity's actions throughout this entire crisis have followed such a consistent, measured pattern. This is not simply doctrine written on paper and followed mechanically. It reflects a genuine, deeply internalized cultural value, one that every individual within their military and diplomatic structures appears to carry personally rather than merely enforce as external policy. As our shuttle finally prepares for departure, Diplomat Bennett offers one final thought that stays with me throughout the journey home. She tells me that humanity does not seek to be feared throughout the galaxy, only understood, and that genuine understanding, she believes, ultimately proves far more valuable for lasting peace than fear ever could. I carry her words carefully alongside everything else I have learned, understanding that this historic first meeting has offered insight far more valuable than any simple trade agreement or diplomatic formality ever could provide. During the return journey toward Council Space, our delegation gathers to compare individual impressions gathered throughout our brief but revealing visit. Torin Wexil admits, with visible surprise, that his lingering skepticism has softened considerably following our discussions, finding genuine consistency between humanity's stated values and their observed behavior throughout every interaction we shared during our time aboard the station. Captain Thale shares a similar assessment, noting that every human representative we encountered, from senior diplomatic staff to the junior security personnel who escorted our shuttle, displayed the same measured professionalism and quiet confidence. He suggests this consistency across different levels of their society indicates values genuinely embedded within their broader culture, rather than merely rehearsed behavior reserved for formal diplomatic occasions. I add my own observation, recalling small details that struck me throughout our visit: the practical, unadorned design of their station, the calm efficiency with which staff handled unexpected scheduling adjustments, the genuine warmth Diplomat Bennett displayed once our formal discussions concluded. Every detail, however minor, reinforced the same fundamental impression: a civilization defined by substance over appearance, principle over posturing. As our shuttle finally crosses back into neutral space, leaving human territory behind, I find myself already looking forward to future interactions, hopeful that this successful first meeting represents merely the beginning of a long, productive relationship between our civilizations. Yet beneath that hope, the persistent worry I voiced to Captain Thale continues lingering, a quiet unease regarding how other, less patient galactic powers might respond to news of humanity's demonstrated strength and evident commitment to peaceful cooperation whenever circumstances allow. News of our successful diplomatic mission spreads quickly through council space, and I return to find the political atmosphere shifting in ways I did not fully anticipate. Where fear and uncertainty once dominated conversations regarding humanity, a strange mixture of relief and renewed ambition now takes its place among various galactic powers, each interpreting our diplomatic breakthrough through the lens of their own particular interests. Celis Morin greets our delegation warmly upon our return, eager to hear every detail of our meeting with human representatives. I share what I can, emphasizing the genuine sincerity I witnessed throughout our discussions, while carefully noting the clear boundaries humanity maintains regarding their ongoing operation against Zorath military infrastructure. She listens intently, her expression thoughtful as she processes this new information. The Vashti Concord, she explains, intends to move quickly toward formalizing trade agreements with humanity, hoping to establish themselves as a primary partner before other, more aggressive powers attempt to exploit the relationship for less honorable purposes. I appreciate her transparency, understanding that even genuine goodwill often carries practical strategic considerations beneath the surface. Not every reaction throughout the galaxy carries the same measured optimism, however. Reports begin filtering in from various sources suggesting growing unease among several major powers, civilizations that view humanity's demonstrated capability not as an opportunity for peaceful cooperation, but as a looming threat requiring immediate, decisive action before it grows any more dangerous than it already appears. I find myself summoned before the Council once again, this time to formally present findings from our diplomatic mission, alongside continued updates regarding the ongoing situation within Zorath territory. The chamber feels notably different from my previous appearances, charged with an undercurrent of tension that suggests significant disagreement simmering just beneath the surface of formal proceedings. I present my report carefully, detailing the successful establishment of diplomatic and trade relations, along with clear explanation regarding the limited, targeted scope of humanity's continued operation against specific Zorath military assets. I emphasize repeatedly that humanity has expressed no interest whatsoever in broader conquest or galactic domination, framing their actions purely as proportional response to unprovoked aggression. Ambassador Dulvane, visibly diminished from his earlier confident posturing, requests permission to speak once the council chairperson concludes my presentation. His voice carries a mixture of desperation and calculated persuasion as he describes the devastating impact this ongoing campaign continues inflicting upon Zorath military capability, painting a picture of a civilization brought to its knees by what he now characterizes as excessive, disproportionate retaliation. I feel compelled to respond directly, reminding the chamber once again that every consequence currently facing the Zorath Dominion stems entirely from their own decision to launch an unprovoked invasion against a sovereign civilization that posed no threat to them whatsoever. Ambassador Dulvane's attempt to reframe this narrative, painting his own government as victims rather than aggressors, strikes me as particularly troubling given everything I personally witnessed throughout this entire unfolding crisis. A new voice enters the discussion, one belonging to the representative of the Thren Ascendancy, a species I have had limited direct interaction with throughout my career, though their reputation for aggressive expansion and calculated ambition precedes them significantly. The representative, a sharp-featured being named Korvath Sten, speaks with a confidence that immediately sets my instincts on edge, reminiscent of the same arrogance Ambassador Dulvane once carried before events humbled him considerably. Korvath argues that humanity's demonstrated capability, regardless of their stated peaceful intentions, represents an unacceptable long-term risk to galactic stability that the Council cannot simply ignore in favor of cautious diplomatic engagement. He suggests that a species capable of such devastating coordinated military action should be contained or neutralized proactively, before their growing influence throughout galactic trade and diplomacy allows them to expand their power beyond any reasonable ability to control. I feel a familiar dread settling within my chest as I listen to his argument, recognizing immediately the same dangerous miscalculation that led the Zorath Dominion toward their current predicament. I request permission to respond, and though I sense growing impatience from certain council factions, the chairperson grants my request, allowing me to address Korvath's concerning proposal directly. I remind the chamber that humanity's response throughout this entire crisis has remained consistently proportional to the threat they actually faced, never escalating beyond what circumstances genuinely warranted. I emphasize that their willingness to engage in good faith diplomatic negotiations, immediately following a decisive military victory against overwhelming numbers, demonstrates clearly that peaceful cooperation remains their genuine preference over continued conflict. Korvath dismisses my argument with visible impatience, insisting that peaceful diplomatic behavior during a moment of clear military advantage proves nothing regarding how humanity might behave once circumstances shift in ways less favorable to their continued dominance. He argues that true intentions only reveal themselves when a civilization faces genuine adversity, and that the Council would be foolish to base long-term policy decisions purely upon behavior observed during a period of obvious human strength. I find myself troubled by the underlying logic within his argument, recognizing that no amount of evidence demonstrating genuine peaceful intent will likely satisfy those already predisposed toward viewing humanity as an inevitable threat, requiring preemptive action. This mindset, I understand with growing unease, represents perhaps the most dangerous element within this entire unfolding situation, more dangerous even than any military capability humanity might actually possess. The debate continues for several more hours, various representatives offering perspectives ranging from cautious optimism to outright alarm regarding humanity's continued presence within galactic affairs. I watch carefully as factions solidify around different positions, understanding that this division within the Council itself may ultimately prove more consequential than anything humanity has done or said throughout this entire crisis. Celis Morin speaks eloquently in favor of continued diplomatic engagement, reminding the chamber that humanity has consistently demonstrated restraint, proportionality, and genuine interest in peaceful cooperation whenever circumstances allowed for such engagement. She warns explicitly against allowing fear-driven speculation to dictate policy decisions that could easily transform a potential ally into a justified adversary through unnecessary provocation. Despite her compelling arguments, I sense growing support throughout certain sections of the chamber for Korvath's more aggressive perspective, particularly among representatives from civilizations with significant military capability of their own, species accustomed to maintaining dominance through strength rather than negotiation. Their discomfort with humanity's demonstrated power seems to override any rational assessment of the actual evidence presented throughout our discussion. The session eventually concludes without formal resolution, the Council once again divided regarding appropriate long-term policy toward humanity, though this time, the disagreement carries far more weight than previous debates, given the stakes now clearly understood by every representative present. I leave the chamber troubled, understanding that this unresolved tension leaves dangerous room for individual civilizations to pursue their own independent judgment regarding how to approach the human question. In the days following this contentious session, I begin monitoring communications and fleet movements throughout Thren Ascendancy territory with growing concern, remembering clearly Korvath's aggressive rhetoric during our council discussion. Captain Thale shares my unease, authorizing additional resources toward tracking any suspicious activity that might suggest the Thren are seriously considering preemptive action against human interests. My concerns prove justified sooner than I hoped when intelligence reports begin surfacing regarding increased military buildup along Thren border regions, accompanied by diplomatic communications suggesting growing frustration with what several Ascendancy officials characterize as the Council's dangerously passive approach toward the human situation. I compile these findings carefully, recognizing familiar warning signs from the pattern that preceded the initial Zorath invasion weeks earlier. I request another emergency session before the Council, presenting this new evidence alongside urgent warnings regarding potential Thren aggression toward human territory. This time, I notice a difference in how my presentation is received, less dismissive skepticism and more genuine concern reflected across many representative faces throughout the chamber. Evidence that recent events have finally taught at least some valuable lessons regarding the importance of taking such warnings seriously. Despite this improved reception, the Council remains divided regarding appropriate action, unable to reach consensus on whether direct intervention against Thren military preparations would represent responsible peacekeeping or unwarranted interference in another sovereign civilization's independent strategic decisions. I watch this familiar pattern of hesitation and delay unfold once again, understanding with growing frustration that bureaucratic caution continues outpacing the urgent reality developing beyond these chamber walls. Celis approaches me, following this inconclusive session, her expression carrying genuine worry as she shares her own private assessment of the situation. She believes, based on her extensive diplomatic experience with Thren officials over many years, that Korvath's aggressive posturing during our previous debate likely reflects genuine intent rather than mere political theater designed to influence council policy discussions. I ask what she believes might convince the Thren ascendancy to reconsider whatever aggressive action they may be planning, and she admits, with visible reluctance, that she fears nothing short of direct, unambiguous demonstration of consequence might successfully deter leadership so thoroughly convinced of their own military superiority and strategic wisdom. Her words settle heavily within me, carrying implications I desperately hope will not prove necessary before this entire situation reaches its inevitable conclusion. As reports of continued Thren military buildup persist over the following days, I find myself once again reaching out through unofficial channels, sending careful warnings toward human diplomatic contacts regarding potential threats developing along their newly established diplomatic relationship with the broader galactic community. I receive acknowledgement of my warning, along with the same calm, measured response I encountered previously, confirmation that appropriate precautions remain ongoing, regardless of whatever specific threat may or may not materialize. This consistent, unwavering composure from human authorities, even when faced with mounting evidence of potential renewed aggression, continues reinforcing everything I have learned throughout this entire crisis regarding their fundamental approach to conflict and diplomacy. They do not panic. They do not overreact based purely on speculation or uncertain intelligence. They simply prepare, patiently and thoroughly, ready to respond appropriately whenever genuine threat actually materializes, rather than merely anticipated danger that may never fully develop. I share this observation with Captain Thale during one of our regular briefings, and he nods slowly, acknowledging the wisdom within such measured restraint, while expressing his own growing concern regarding what might happen should the Thren ascendancy prove foolish enough to translate their aggressive rhetoric into genuine military action against a civilization that has already demonstrated, quite clearly, exactly how they respond to unprovoked hostility. Neither of us can predict with certainty how this developing situation will ultimately resolve itself, though the pattern established through the Zorath Dominion's costly experience offers little reassurance regarding what consequences might await any civilization foolish enough to repeat their exact mistake. I find myself hoping, perhaps naively, that reason and caution might yet prevail among Thren leadership before this entire crisis escalates toward another devastating confrontation that could have easily been avoided through wisdom rather than pride. I decide to pursue an additional avenue of investigation, reaching out to several contacts I have cultivated within neutral trading networks that maintain relationships with civilizations across many different regions of the galaxy, including limited contact with Thren merchant vessels that occasionally pass through shared trade routes. I hope these informal channels might reveal insight that official diplomatic and intelligence sources have so far failed to capture. One contact, a cautious trader named Fea Rist, who has dealt with Thren merchants for many years, agrees to share what she has observed during recent transactions, though she insists on meeting privately rather than through any official channel that might expose her to unwanted scrutiny. I arrange passage to a neutral trading station, where we meet quietly in a secluded section of the docking concourse. Fea explains that Thren merchant crews have grown noticeably tense in recent weeks, many expressing frustration regarding military requisitions disrupting normal trade operations throughout Ascendancy territory. She describes overhearing fragments of conversation, suggesting significant resources being redirected toward what crew members vaguely refer to as a demonstration project, though she admits she has no clear understanding of what this actually entails. I press for additional detail, and she recalls one particular conversation where a ship captain expressed concern that Ascendancy leadership was moving too quickly, dismissing warnings from experienced military advisors in favor of a bold strategic gamble that several within the merchant fleet privately consider reckless, given everything they have heard regarding the Zorath Dominion's costly experience only weeks earlier. This information, though frustratingly vague, confirms my growing suspicion that Thren leadership remains committed to some form of direct action against human interests, despite mounting evidence suggesting such action would prove catastrophically unwise. I thank Fea for her assistance, offering appropriate compensation for the risk she has taken sharing this sensitive information, before returning immediately to report these findings to Captain Thale. He listens carefully to my account, agreeing that this additional evidence, while still circumstantial, reinforces the urgency of our earlier warnings. We compile everything together, official intelligence reports alongside these informal trading network observations, preparing yet another comprehensive briefing for Council consideration, though both of us harbor growing doubt regarding whether even this combined evidence will prove sufficient to inspire meaningful preventative action before the situation escalates entirely beyond any hope of peaceful resolution. I present this updated intelligence during a smaller, less formal session with several sympathetic council representatives, hoping a more intimate setting might allow for genuine discussion rather than the theatrical posturing that often dominates larger chamber proceedings. Celis Morin attends, along with two other representatives who have grown increasingly concerned regarding the trajectory of Thren rhetoric over recent weeks. One representative, a cautious diplomat from a smaller trading collective, asks whether direct communication with Thren leadership might still prove effective in de-escalating tensions before matters progress further. Celis shakes her head slowly, explaining from her own considerable diplomatic experience that leadership already committed to a particular strategic course rarely reverses direction based purely on outside appeals, particularly once pride and public posturing have become entangled with the decision. I share this same assessment, reminding the group that Korvath's confident rhetoric during our earlier council session suggested someone already committed to action rather than genuinely weighing available alternatives. Words alone, I fear, will accomplish little at this stage, though I remain uncertain what additional measures our limited authority might realistically achieve, beyond continued documentation and warning. The small group discusses several possible approaches, from formal council censure of Thren military buildup to quiet diplomatic pressure applied through allied trading partners who maintain economic leverage over ascendancy interests. None of these options feel particularly promising given the timeline we appear to be working within, and the meeting concludes with a shared sense of resigned apprehension, rather than any confident plan capable of preventing what now feels like an increasingly inevitable confrontation. I returned to my quarters that evening carrying the familiar, exhausting weight of having done everything within my power to warn those capable of intervening, while still lacking any authority to force meaningful action before consequences ultimately arrive. I find myself hoping, against mounting evidence to the contrary, that perhaps Thren leadership will yet reconsider their reckless course, before crossing a threshold from which there can be no peaceful return. I am jolted awake by an emergency alert flashing across every screen in my quarters, its harsh tone unlike anything used for routine notifications. I scramble to my console, and the moment the report finishes loading, my stomach drops entirely. The Thren Ascendancy has launched a coordinated strike against a human colony world, a mid-sized settlement known as Meridian Hollow, positioned along the outer edge of human-controlled territory. I rush to the bridge, finding Captain Thale already there, his expression grim as he studies incoming reports with visible tension. He confirms what I feared the moment I read the alert, that Thren forces struck without warning, targeting orbital infrastructure and ground-based facilities in a calculated assault clearly designed to inflict maximum damage before any meaningful defense could be organized. I ask how significant the initial damage appears, and Captain Thale's answer carries a weight that settles heavily over the entire bridge. Casualty reports remain incomplete, but early estimates suggest genuine loss of life among colony personnel, along with substantial destruction to critical infrastructure supporting the settlement's continued operation. This is no longer a battle between warships in open space. This is an attack against a civilian population, a line I suspect the Thren Ascendancy will soon discover carries far more severe consequences than they anticipated. I think immediately of Korvath's confident rhetoric during our council session, his insistence that decisive preemptive action represented the only responsible path forward regarding the human question. I wonder now, with a mixture of dread and grim certainty, whether he truly understood what he was inviting through this reckless, calculated gamble against a civilization that has already demonstrated exactly how they respond to unprovoked violence against their people. Captain Thale orders our sensors focused entirely on the developing situation, and I watch alongside him as fragmented reports continue arriving from various listening posts scattered throughout the region. The attack itself, we learn, achieved genuine tactical success in its opening phase, catching colony defenses off guard before reinforcements could arrive to properly respond to the sudden, coordinated assault. I feel a strange, uncomfortable tension building within me as I wait for humanity's response, knowing from everything I have learned throughout this entire crisis exactly what pattern likely to threaten ascendancy in the days and weeks ahead. Yet knowing intellectually what will likely happen differs considerably from actually witnessing the full weight of that response unfold in real time. Word arrives within hours that human relief forces have already begun arriving at Meridian Hollow, securing the colony, and beginning immediate efforts to address casualties and repair critical damage to essential infrastructure. I notice, studying these initial reports carefully, the same measured efficiency I witnessed during our earlier diplomatic visit: calm coordination rather than panic, thorough response rather than desperate improvisation. Captain Thale asks for my assessment regarding how quickly humanity might organize a broader retaliatory response against threatened territory, and I admit genuine uncertainty, though I suspect this attack, striking directly at civilian infrastructure rather than purely military targets, likely represents a significant escalation compared to the Zorath Dominion's initial provocation weeks earlier. My prediction proves accurate sooner than I anticipated. Within just 3 days of the initial attack, intelligence reports begin surfacing regarding unusual activity throughout Thren-controlled space, patterns disturbingly familiar from the earlier campaign against Zorath infrastructure, though this time unfolding with noticeably greater speed and intensity than the previous operation. I compile these emerging reports carefully, tracking incidents across multiple Thren systems simultaneously, communication relays going dark, military production facilities suffering unexplained catastrophic failures, transport convoys vanishing entirely without any trace or distress signal reaching nearby monitoring stations. The scope and speed of this developing campaign exceeds anything I witnessed during the earlier Zorath conflict considerably. Captain Thale reviews my analysis with growing concern, noting that humanity appears to have refined their approach significantly since the earlier campaign, applying lessons learned to execute this current operation with far greater efficiency and coordination than before. I agree completely, recognizing that whatever restraint humanity showed during their initial response to Zorath aggression has clearly diminished considerably following this direct attack against civilian population centers. Reports continue arriving over the following days, painting an increasingly clear picture of systematic, thorough dismantling of Thren military capability throughout their entire territory. Unlike the more contained campaign against Zorath infrastructure, this operation appears to extend deeper, targeting not just facilities directly connected to the attack itself, but broader military production and command structures throughout the entire ascendancy. I request an emergency audience before the Galactic Council once again, hoping to provide accurate, timely information regarding this rapidly escalating situation before speculation and rumor distort the true scope of what is actually unfolding throughout Thren space. The chamber, when I arrive, carries a palpable tension unlike anything I witnessed during previous sessions. Representatives clearly aware that this crisis now threatens to reshape galactic politics far more significantly than the earlier Zorath conflict ever did. I present my findings carefully, detailing the systematic nature of humanity's response, emphasizing the clear connection between this campaign's intensity and the severity of the Thren attack against civilian colony infrastructure. I remind the Chamber explicitly that this escalation stems directly from the Ascendancy's choice to target non-military population centers, a decision that appears to have removed whatever restraint humanity previously demonstrated during their response to purely military aggression from the Zorath Dominion. Korvath, notably absent from this particular session, has been replaced by a visibly shaken junior representative, struggling to defend Thren actions before an increasingly hostile chamber. I watch with a strange mixture of vindication and genuine sorrow as this young official attempts to justify decisions clearly made without his input or approval, forced now to bear the diplomatic consequences of choices made by leadership that severely miscalculated the true nature of the civilization they chose to provoke. Celis Morin speaks during this session with visible emotion, expressing genuine concern regarding the scale of destruction now unfolding throughout Thren territory, even while acknowledging that this outcome stems entirely from choices made independently by Ascendancy leadership, despite clear warnings offered repeatedly throughout previous council discussions. Her words carry no satisfaction regarding this unfolding tragedy, only somber recognition that reckless ambition has once again invited devastating, entirely predictable consequences. I find myself reflecting deeply on everything that has transpired since that first moment I encountered wreckage from humanity's initial defensive response weeks ago. What began as a single unprovoked attack against an unarmed vessel has now escalated into a pattern repeating itself across multiple civilizations, each apparently requiring their own costly, devastating lesson before truly understanding the consequences of underestimating this remarkable, formidable species. Days continue passing with the campaign against Thren territory showing no signs of slowing, though I notice something particularly significant emerging from the intelligence reports I continue compiling carefully. Unlike broader conquest, humanity's operation remains precisely targeted, focused entirely on military and command infrastructure, while civilian population centers throughout Thren space remain notably untouched by this devastating campaign. Captain Thale points out this distinction during one of our regular briefings, noting that despite the severity and scope of this current operation, humanity continues demonstrating the same careful precision and proportional targeting that characterized their earlier response to Zorath aggression. This is not indiscriminate destruction born from anger or revenge. This remains, even at this expanded scale, a calculated, deliberate campaign focused exclusively on eliminating genuine military threat. I share this observation during my next council appearance, emphasizing that even amid this significant escalation, humanity's fundamental approach remains consistent with everything I have learned regarding their doctrine and values throughout this entire unfolding crisis. They are not seeking to destroy Thren civilization entirely, merely to ensure the specific military capability and leadership responsible for authorizing this attack can never again threaten human civilian populations. This distinction, though perhaps small comfort to the Thren military personnel currently facing the full consequences of their leadership's reckless decisions, offers important insight into how humanity approaches even significantly escalated conflict. Their response scales proportionally to the severity of provocation received, but never crosses into indiscriminate destruction that would harm those uninvolved in the original decision to initiate hostility against them. Nearly 2 weeks after the initial attack against Meridian Hollow, intelligence reports begin suggesting that Thren military capability has been reduced to a fraction of its previous strength, command structures thoroughly dismantled, production facilities destroyed beyond any reasonable hope of quick recovery. Desperate diplomatic communications begin reaching the Council, Thren officials seeking any possible path toward negotiated resolution before their entire military infrastructure collapses completely. I watch these developments unfold with a complicated mixture of emotions, understanding intellectually that this outcome represents entirely predictable consequences for reckless, unprovoked aggression, while simultaneously recognizing the genuine tragedy unfolding for countless individuals who bear the weight of decisions made by leadership, pursuing dangerous, misguided ambition rather than wisdom and restraint. The Council convenes an emergency session specifically to address formal Thren requests for mediated negotiation with human authorities, hoping to establish some path toward ending this devastating campaign before the Ascendancy's military capability suffers complete, irreversible collapse. I attend this session with genuine curiosity regarding how humanity might respond to such desperate overtures, following weeks of methodical, devastating military action. Diplomat Bennett herself arrives to represent human interests during this critical negotiation session, her presence carrying significant weight, given her direct involvement in our earlier successful diplomatic breakthrough. I watch her carefully as she listens to increasingly desperate Thren pleas for mercy, her expression carrying the same measured composure I remember from our very first meeting weeks earlier. When she finally speaks, her words carry neither vindictive satisfaction nor excessive leniency, but rather the same calculated proportionality that has characterized every human action throughout this entire crisis. She states clearly that humanity remains willing to cease current military operations immediately, provided the ascendancy agrees to specific, verifiable conditions, ensuring their military capability cannot be rebuilt to threaten human interests again in the foreseeable future. The conditions she outlines prove significant but not unreasonable. Substantial reduction in military production capacity, transparent oversight regarding future defense-related development, and formal acknowledgement of responsibility for the unprovoked attack against Meridian Hollow. I notice, studying these terms carefully, that humanity seeks security and accountability, rather than humiliation or unnecessary punishment, beyond what genuine safety actually requires. The Thren representatives, recognizing they possess little leverage to negotiate more favorable terms given their current desperate military situation, accept these conditions with visible relief, understanding clearly that this agreement likely represents the best possible outcome available to them, following such catastrophic strategic miscalculation. The formal ceasefire agreement is signed within hours, bringing this devastating chapter of conflict to its conclusion. As the session concludes, and representatives begin departing the chamber, I find myself approached once again by Celis Moran, her expression thoughtful as she reflects on everything we have witnessed together throughout this remarkable, sobering crisis. She asks what I believe other galactic powers will ultimately learn from watching two significant civilizations suffer such devastating consequences for underestimating humanity so severely. I consider her question carefully before responding, drawing upon everything I have observed throughout these past weeks of careful study and direct observation. I tell her honestly that I hope, perhaps optimistically, that wisdom rather than fear will guide future interactions between humanity and the broader galactic community, though history throughout this galaxy has rarely favored such hopeful expectations regarding how ambitious civilizations respond to demonstrated strength in others. Captain Thale, joining our conversation as we prepare to depart the chamber ourselves, offers his own perspective, noting that regardless of whatever lessons other civilizations may or may not learn from these recent events, humanity's consistent, proportional response throughout both conflicts has established something valuable within galactic politics. A clear, predictable pattern that any reasonable civilization should now understand thoroughly before considering hostile action against human interests moving forward. I nod in agreement, though something within me continues wondering whether predictability alone will prove sufficient to prevent future conflict entirely. Ambition, pride, and miscalculation have driven civilizations toward reckless decisions throughout galactic history, regardless of how clearly consequences might be understood beforehand. And I fear this pattern, however well documented now through recent devastating example, may not yet have run its complete course across the wider galactic community. In the quiet days following the formal ceasefire agreement, I request permission to travel personally to Meridian Hollow, hoping to witness firsthand the aftermath of the attack that ultimately triggered such significant consequence throughout Thren territory. Captain Thale approves my request, understanding my need to fully comprehend every dimension of this crisis, rather than relying solely on distant reports and second-hand accounts. The colony, when I arrive, shows clear signs of recovery already underway, human engineering teams working steadily to repair damaged infrastructure, while medical personnel continue tending to those injured during the initial assault. I am struck immediately by the resilience evident throughout the settlement, residents going about rebuilding efforts with quiet determination, rather than lingering despair or visible anger toward those responsible for their suffering. I am granted permission to speak briefly with a colony administrator named Karen Ellison, who oversees much of the ongoing recovery effort. She shares her own experience of the attack, describing the initial chaos and fear before human defense forces arrived to secure the settlement and begin coordinated relief efforts. I ask whether she harbors resentment toward the Thren ascendancy for the suffering they caused her community. She considers the question thoughtfully before answering, explaining that anger served little purpose once the immediate crisis had passed, that her energy is better spent rebuilding what was lost, rather than dwelling on grievance against those who caused the damage. She acknowledges the military response was necessary and appropriate, but expresses hope that the resulting agreement will prevent similar tragedy from befalling other colonies in the future, human or otherwise. This conversation leaves a lasting impression on me, offering insight into the broader cultural resilience that seems to underpin humanity's approach to adversity at every level, from military doctrine down to individual colonists rebuilding their homes after devastating attack. I record her words carefully, understanding they offer valuable perspective for the report I continue compiling throughout this entire remarkable, sobering journey of discovery and understanding. Before departing Meridian Hollow, I visit a small memorial recently established near the colony's central square, honoring those who lost their lives during the initial assault. The memorial itself carries simple, unadorned design, names inscribed carefully without excessive decoration or elaborate tribute, a quiet, dignified acknowledgement of loss that speaks to the same measured, restrained character I have witnessed throughout every aspect of human behavior during this entire crisis. I return to my ship, carrying a far deeper understanding of everything this conflict has meant, not merely as abstract military and diplomatic developments unfolding across galactic communication networks, but as genuine human experience, loss, resilience, and quiet determination to rebuild, rather than dwell indefinitely on grievance. This perspective, I realize, proves just as valuable for my ongoing work as any strategic or tactical analysis I have compiled throughout these past several turbulent weeks. Years have passed since those turbulent weeks that first introduced the wider galaxy to humanity's true capability and character, and I find myself now serving in a very different role than the anxious intelligence officer who once stood alone before a dismissive council, desperately trying to warn them of dangers they refused to acknowledge. I write this account not as urgent warning anymore, but as careful reflection, hoping future generations might learn from everything our galaxy experienced during that pivotal period of first contact and costly misunderstanding. The Zorath Dominion, though still existing as a sovereign civilization, never fully recovered the military dominance they once commanded throughout their region of space. Their leadership, humbled considerably by such decisive defeat, has since pursued cautious, respectful diplomatic relationships with human authorities, transforming what began as reckless aggression into a stable, if somewhat uneasy, peaceful coexistence that continues benefiting both civilizations through careful, measured trade and cultural exchange. The Thren Ascendancy followed a similar path, though their transformation required considerably more time given the severity of consequences they faced following their disastrous attack against Meridian Hollow. I have watched with genuine interest as their society gradually shifted away from the aggressive expansionist policies that once defined their approach toward galactic relationships, embracing instead a more collaborative philosophy that acknowledges strength through partnership, rather than domination through fear and intimidation. Humanity itself, throughout these intervening years, has continued exactly the pattern I first observed during those early, uncertain days of initial contact. They have not pursued additional territory beyond their original claims, nor have they leveraged their demonstrated military capability to establish any form of galactic dominance over other civilizations. Instead, they have focused steadily on building genuine partnerships, trading fairly, sharing knowledge generously, and maintaining the same consistent, proportional approach to any potential threat that might arise along their expanding presence throughout known space. I think often about that early data core I recovered from Zorath wreckage all those years ago, the doctrine documents that first revealed humanity's fundamental approach to conflict and security. Everything I read within those files has proven entirely accurate through direct observation over these many years since, confirming that humanity's actions were never driven by hidden ambition or calculated deception, but by genuine, deeply held values, shaped through their own difficult historical journey toward becoming the civilization they are today. Diplomat Bennett, now serving in a considerably more senior role within human diplomatic circles, remains someone I correspond with regularly, our professional relationship having grown into genuine friendship over these intervening years. During our most recent exchange, she shared her own reflection on everything that transpired during those early, tense weeks of first contact, noting that humanity's consistent approach throughout both conflicts ultimately established something valuable, not through intimidation, but through demonstrated reliability and predictable, principled behavior. Celis Morin, having risen considerably within Vashti Concord diplomatic leadership, continues serving as one of humanity's strongest advocates throughout ongoing council discussions, her early recognition of their genuine character having proven remarkably prescient given everything that unfolded during subsequent years. We often reflect together on those tense early sessions, grateful that reason and patience ultimately prevailed over the fear and aggressive posturing that nearly led to far greater tragedy throughout our galaxy. Captain Thale, my longtime mentor and colleague throughout this entire remarkable journey, has since retired from active fleet service, though he remains an invaluable advisor whenever complex situations involving human relations arise within council discussions. I visit him occasionally, and our conversations invariably return to those formative weeks when neither of us fully understood the magnitude of what we were witnessing unfold before us. The Galactic Council itself has evolved considerably since those early days of uncertain first contact, incorporating lessons learned through such costly experience into more thoughtful, deliberate policies regarding new civilizations encountered throughout continued galactic exploration. I like to believe, perhaps with some professional pride, that my own persistent warnings, however initially dismissed, ultimately contributed toward this more cautious, respectful approach that now characterizes how the Council handles unfamiliar species and potential diplomatic situations. Young officers entering Council intelligence services now study the entire sequence of events I witnessed firsthand as essential training material, examining every decision, every miscalculation, every moment where wisdom might have prevented such devastating, unnecessary conflict entirely. I have had the genuine privilege of contributing directly to this training curriculum, sharing insights gathered through years of careful study and direct observation of humanity's remarkable, principled approach to galactic relationships. The core lesson I always emphasize to these new officers remains the same fundamental truth I struggled desperately to communicate during those early, frustrating council sessions so many years ago. Humanity's strength was never the primary danger our galaxy faced during that pivotal period. The true danger lay in underestimating a civilization simply because their approach to power and conflict differed from established galactic norms, mistaking patience and restraint for weakness, rather than recognizing them as evidence of genuine, deeply considered strength. I often reflect on how differently everything might have unfolded had the Council taken my initial warnings seriously from the very beginning, potentially preventing both the Zorath invasion and subsequent Thren attack entirely through proactive diplomatic engagement, rather than reactive crisis management following devastating, costly conflict. Yet I also recognize that perhaps this difficult, painful journey proved necessary for our galaxy to genuinely understand and respect humanity's true character, lessons that mere diplomatic warning alone might never have fully conveyed. Humanity, for their part, has never expressed resentment or lingering hostility toward the Council for their initial dismissive response to my early warnings, nor toward the Zorath Dominion or Thren Ascendancy for their reckless, costly aggression. Diplomat Bennett once explained to me that holding on to anger regarding past conflict serves little practical purpose once genuine resolution has been achieved through appropriate accountability and demonstrated commitment toward peaceful coexistence moving forward. This forgiving, forward-looking approach continues surprising many throughout our galactic community who still struggle to fully reconcile humanity's demonstrated military capability with their genuine commitment toward peaceful, collaborative relationships whenever circumstances allow for such cooperation. I have come to understand this apparent contradiction as simply reflecting the true complexity and depth of human character, a civilization capable of both devastating strength and genuine compassion, wielding each appropriately according to circumstances that genuinely warrant their application. As I conclude this lengthy reflection, prepared specifically for training purposes within our continued intelligence services, I find myself returning once more to that single, defining lesson every officer studying this account must internalize thoroughly before entering their own career, navigating the complex realities of galactic diplomacy. Never mistake patience for weakness. Never assume restraint indicates limited capability. And never, under any circumstances, provoke a civilization without first thoroughly understanding exactly what consequences that provocation might ultimately invite. The galaxy we inhabit today looks considerably different than the one I first navigated as an anxious young intelligence officer, uncertain how to properly warn skeptical leadership about a threat they refuse to take seriously. Humanity has become a respected, valued member of our broader galactic community. Their consistent, principled behavior having earned them genuine trust and partnership from civilizations that once viewed them with either dismissive skepticism or unfounded fear. Yet the lesson their arrival taught our entire galaxy remains as relevant today as it was during those tense, uncertain early weeks of first contact. Somewhere throughout the vast expanse of space still unexplored by our current civilizations, other unfamiliar species undoubtedly await discovery, each carrying their own unique history, values, and capabilities that we cannot yet fully comprehend or anticipate. I hope, whenever such encounters eventually occur, that the hard-learned wisdom from humanity's arrival guides our approach, favoring careful understanding and genuine respect over the reckless assumptions that once nearly led our galaxy toward far greater, unnecessary tragedy. I close this account the same way I opened my very first warning to a dismissive council so many years ago, though now carrying the weight of hard-earned experience rather than mere speculation and concern. Some civilizations reveal their true strength through conquest and domination, seeking to prove their power through the subjugation of others. Humanity revealed theirs through something far more remarkable and enduring, demonstrating that genuine strength lies not in seeking conflict, but in responding to it with exactly the measure of consequence required, no more and no less, while always remaining ready to extend genuine partnership toward anyone willing to approach them with equal respect and honest intention. This, more than any single battle or diplomatic negotiation I witnessed throughout those remarkable formative years, remains the true legacy of humanity's arrival within our galactic community, a legacy I hope continues guiding wiser, more thoughtful decisions among every civilization fortunate enough to learn from everything our galaxy experienced during that pivotal, unforgettable chapter of our shared history among the stars. Sometimes, during quiet evenings aboard whatever vessel currently carries me toward my next assignment, I find myself returning to that very first night when alarms tore through my quarters and I stumbled onto a bridge filled with confusion and fear regarding wreckage nobody yet understood. I remember the uncertainty, the dread, the desperate need to make sense of something entirely outside anything our galaxy had previously encountered. I could not have imagined then how thoroughly that single moment would reshape not only my own career and understanding of galactic politics, but the broader trajectory of relationships between countless civilizations scattered throughout known space. What began as a single unprovoked attack against an unfamiliar vessel ultimately became the catalyst for a fundamental shift in how our entire galactic community approaches encounters with unknown and unfamiliar powers. I think, too, about young Officer Doran Vess, whose fateful decision to fire upon that unarmed human vessel set this entire chain of events into motion. I learned, some years later, that he struggled considerably with the weight of that decision, understanding fully the scale of consequence his single choice ultimately triggered across multiple civilizations. I met with him once, during a quiet gathering of retired officers, and found him thoughtful and humbled rather than defensive or dismissive regarding his role in these historic events. He told me, during that brief conversation, that he hoped his mistake might serve as lasting instruction for future officers facing similarly uncertain first encounters, a reminder that caution and restraint often prove wiser than immediate, fear-driven reaction when confronting the truly unknown. I found his humility genuinely admirable, understanding that acknowledging past error honestly requires considerable courage, particularly when that error carried such far-reaching historic consequence. As new generations of officers continue entering council service, carrying forward the lessons documented within this account, and countless others like it, I remain cautiously hopeful regarding the future trajectory of relationships between our diverse galactic community and civilizations we have yet to encounter. The path toward genuine understanding rarely proves smooth or without cost, as our own difficult journey with humanity demonstrated so clearly, yet I remain convinced that wisdom, patience, and genuine respect ultimately offer our best hope for a galaxy defined by cooperation, rather than perpetual. I set down my recording device now, this account complete, hopeful that whoever reads or hears these words in the years ahead carries forward not fear of the unknown, but genuine curiosity and respect for the countless remarkable civilizations still waiting to be discovered throughout the vast, endless expanse of stars still stretching out before us all. Before I close this record entirely, I want to share one final memory that I believe captures the true spirit of everything I have tried to convey throughout this lengthy account. Several years after the Thren ceasefire, I attended a modest cultural exchange event hosted jointly by human and Kel-Dari organizers aboard a neutral station positioned between our respective territories, intended simply to foster friendship and mutual understanding between our two peoples. I found myself seated beside a young human engineer named Grace Whitmore, part of a technical delegation sharing knowledge regarding sustainable resource management practices developed throughout human colonization efforts. Our conversation drifted naturally from technical matters toward more personal reflection, and I found myself sharing, for the first time with someone born after these historic events, my own experience witnessing humanity's arrival within our galactic community. She listened with genuine curiosity, asking thoughtful questions about how our galaxy viewed her people during those uncertain early days. Questions that revealed she had grown up understanding this history, primarily through her own culture's perspective, rather than the anxious, uncertain viewpoint I carried throughout those turbulent weeks. When I finished sharing my account, she offered a simple observation that I have carried with me ever since. She told me that her grandmother, who lived through the earliest days of expanded contact with the wider galaxy, always said that humanity never wanted to be feared, only trusted, and that trust, unlike fear, must be built patiently through consistent action over considerable time, rather than demanded through any single display of strength. I found her words a fitting echo of everything I witnessed personally throughout this remarkable journey, confirmation that the values I observed within official diplomatic and military conduct genuinely reflect deeper cultural understanding, passed thoughtfully between generations. That conversation aboard a quiet, neutral station, shared between two individuals representing civilizations that once faced such uncertain, potentially catastrophic first contact, remains for me the truest measure of everything this difficult, costly journey ultimately achieved. Not merely averted catastrophe or negotiated peace, but genuine friendship built patiently upon a foundation of hard-earned mutual respect, exactly as that grandmother, and countless others like her, always believed it eventually would.